with better equipment.
Woo woo.
Hopefully you can hear me this time because no one could last time.
I'm a little louder than he is, so I think that'll work out. We also have our helpful puppy down here in the corner. We're trying out of the crate this time, so we'll see how that goes. If at some point he suddenly disappears, it's because the dog is getting put away in the crate for a little bit.
Well, tonight's a bit of a doozy. This is probably one of the most conflicting rules, I guess, in 5th edition. Something that seems to be one of the biggest parts of arguments between players and DMs.
Good thing we're tackling it in our second episode.
And we are going to talk about spellcasting today. And not just spellcasting, but kind of magic's place in the world. Magic, weapons, items, the weave of magic, if you know what that is.
I did my homework. I know what the weave of magic is.
And also, while magic or certain magics are commonplace and, you know, they may even be used as trade tools, there are other magics that are thought worse of and maybe illegal or banished, illegal. So let's start off with.
And just as a note, we could spend many episodes talking about spellcasting. There's a lot to it. So this is kind of, like you said, an overview of the place of it. So I'm sure there'll be more episodes to come, kind of diving into some of the nitty gritty stuffs.
Yep. Yeah, there's going to be plenty of episodes on magic related stuff. This is just going to be a general overview of some of the main topics, mostly being spells coming from a player.
Or a DM.
Or a DM. Coming from a creature. And then I will dive a little bit into the roles it plays behind the scenes.
My favorite is seeing, him grab 40 dice and throw it, and you're about to take like 80,000 points of damage. So that's cool.
Right around the time when I say, make a dex save, make a constitution save.
Entire table groans. Okay, well, where do you want to start?
The beginning, I guess.
Oof. Well, true to form, if you choose a spellcasting character, you're probably going to have quite a bit of homework to do before you go into your session. And I say that we will talk about it in more length because when you're playing a spellcasting character, I didn't know this, by the way, when I picked my first spellcasting character, but you should probably do a little digging and know your spells at least a little bit superficially. Know how much damage you do. Know how many dice you need to roll to, for cure wounds. Know some of your handier, more used cantrips on hand, aka do your homework for the session. So true to form, I did my homework on spellcasting before this session. In fact, using, as we've shown you before, this beautiful Player's Handbook. And I say beautiful, the artwork is gorgeous inside of it. There's an entire chapter devoted to the basics of what is spellcasting. So not that I want to go all the way through this. I did the homework, so you don't have to. But this is probably a good place to kind of map out spellcasting.
Yep. So let's kind of start out with what is magic, right? Magic is, wow, that's a difficult question.
A good place to start.
Yeah. So magic is power pulled from what is called the weave within 5th edition. If you think about the weave, I like to compare it to like the fabric of space-time almost. There is, space isn't flat. It weaves and there's wormholes and there's power and gravity. And I feel like there's a smaller version of that within the world, and certain creatures, either naturally magical, those who have learned how to use magic, or those who are innately magic, like fey creatures.
Okay.
They have learned how to harness this power and form it into one of the schools of magic. Those schools, they are, I think there's 7 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I was close. 8 of them. And these schools of magic, most people aren't devoted to just one school. They usually will make a menagerie of different schools to kind of fit their specific needs. And I'm just going to real quick go through the schools and just give the name of the school, like a 1 sentence, what it's about, and then an example of a spell.
Okay.
So the first one is abjuration, and essentially this is protective magic. This is like whenever a wizard or a bard or someone casts a shield as a reaction and raises their AC by, I think, 5 points. It's a reaction real quick. Abjuration magic creates a defensive barrier.
And we'll come back and talk about using spells in combat.
Yep.
Tee-hee.
Conjuration is transporting something from one place to another, either through from a different plane to this one or within the same plane. But it's essentially conjuration is, let's say it's like summon demons is a conjure spell.
And when you say from one plane to another, kind of making it a little looser here, one plane, you're summoning demons from somewhere in that universe, or you're summoning demons from like a whole other place that you could not get to unless the spell was cast to bring them there?
Yes, the second one.
Okay.
For instance, let's say you had the ability to summon a devil. Devils are in the 9 hells. The 9 hells is a separate plane of existence that you cannot get to unless you have a transportation spell to get you there.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yep. Divination reveals information. This is one, and I'm sure everyone knows, detect magic, identify, something that will reveal the nature of something else, whether it be writing, an item. It essentially just kind of reveals the nature of something else.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you use that stuff like that on a person? Reveal the nature of a person, or is it really just on inanimate objects and stuff like that?
It's not necessarily on inanimate objects, because what you can do is at higher levels, you can use divination spells to actually speak to a god and get insight on certain things. They can even tell you if you're going in the right direction.
Okay. But you couldn't use a spell in that category, so to speak, to override having to roll for an insight check on a person?
No, but it would help.
Okay.
Yeah, it could help. For instance,
Self-support.
If you were to detect magic, detect magic is a radius. And if you were trying to find someone in a room that you couldn't see, but your detect magic pinged, you would know where they were in the room.
Okay.
If they had something magical or if they were magical.
Okay.
Enchantment. This one can alter properties and alter minds. So it can make people believe something that shouldn't happen. And it can also, probably what it's most commonly used for is enhancing weapons, armors, items.
Okay.
A good...
Is it a permanent? Could you make something like a permanent enhancement, or it's a temporary, like only when the spell's active? We'll talk about concentration and stuff like that.
So I would say one of the biggest or the most common ones is bless, right? Bless enhances you for like a minute, not very long, whereas you could... Sorry, the dog's chomping away over there.
Chomp, chomp, chomp.
Whereas at a much higher level, you can enchant permanently a weapon.
Okay.
That takes months, even years, depending on the enchantment.
So you really kind of couldn't, because it would require your character being concentration for months on end without breaking.
You can do it in small chunks. That's why it takes for that much longer. But it is something that players may choose to do in what's called downtime, what happens between the sessions.
Okay.
And we'll probably won't get into that kind of stuff right now, but that is something that they can do.
Okay.
We'll move on. Evocation. This is what makes people hurt and what heals people.
Okay.
So I will give you 2 examples of evocation. One is fireball. is an evocation spell.
My absolute favorite.
On the opposite end of the spectrum is almost every healing spell. So those
Cure
both.
wounds.
Yep. Illusion, that's pretty simple. Make people see things that aren't there, that don't exist.
Oh, my favorite example of that, just to add a little flavor, we have a gnome wizard, I believe, in camp we haven't played in a while, and there was a T-Rex coming at us, and he used an illusion spell to make it look like there was another dinosaur farther away, moving around to attract the T-Rex to that spot and let us get away safely.
Yep.
So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with spells like that.
Yep. The next one is necromancy. Now, this is one of the spells that may not be particularly legal. It's what you think it is. It is bringing life to that which is no longer alive.
Okay.
Raising the dead. Oh, dog, no! Don't pull that. That's gonna get rid of all our audio. Get back. Go away. Sit. Whatever. Necromancy, bring the dead back. And then the last one is transmutation, which is converting a matter of one kind to another.
Okay.
Historically, you would remember this as someone trying to turn lead into gold,
Okay.
which is actually possible in D&D at a higher level.
Damn. He knows what I'm trying to ask before I get there. I will mention, because I know that's the last one for necromancy, one of the things that I read in my homework is that a lot of, for example, creating undead through the use of necromancy spells, such as animate dead, is actually an evil alignment. It's not a good act. And so one thing that we will I think this might be a good point to talk about for some of these schools of magic, is the idea of the spells that you have and use should not only be reflective of the character that you have, but also make sense for your alignment, for your role in the group, things like that. If you're supposed to be a healing kind of archetype in your group, you probably should have as many healing spells as you can possibly have while still being able to protect yourself and participate. Which is probably why some people don't like to play the healer as much, because it's a little less action heavy. But it is a really important role in any campaign, of course, the guy who keeps everyone from dying. So when you're looking at, known versus prepared, which we'll talk about, the types of spells you grab, that's why it's a different combination of schools of magic. It really does depend on your character, your play style, and your role in the group. So those are all really important things to think about as you're looking at your spells, right?
Yep, exactly. And we kind of very lightly hinted at this in the last podcast when we were talking about the paladin who did the inflict wounds on the bear, and that doesn't align.
Yes. Okay.
So.
And what we were talking earlier about the weave. This kind of ties back in. So I read that there are two types of weave. I don't know if those are the only types, but at least the two types they mentioned. There's arcane magic and divine magic. And the part that I read really about it was that divine magic comes from a god. That's usually where it's supposed to be coming from, is it's, an external source like your god. So if you pick a lawful good god that expects you to do lawful good things, and you use your magic instead to murder hobo things, they can take away your magic, and then all of a sudden you are a quote unquote useless player with,
Yep.
nothing.
Divine magic is powers bestowed upon by a higher being.
Whereas arcane is innate.
Arcane is more so pulled from natural
abilities.
Abilities.
Because there are certain classes that kind of fall in each category. They say, what is it? Druids and clerics, rangers, paladins. A lot of those are going to be people who get their magic from that external source. And so that's especially, in my opinion, where a lot of that god alignment stuff comes in handy.
Mm-hmm. So.
Another kind of thing that I think is interesting to think about, though he's going to let the dog out, yay. Another thing that I think is kind of important too is when you're looking at spells and you're kind of deciding what spells you want to put in your arsenal. I did not realize how important the component part of it is. And when I say component, I'm talking about how the spell is actually done and performed, which in this case refers to verbal, somatic, and material spells. And in your head, you're like, okay, that's, fine, whatever I got to do. But verbal, for example, if you need to cast a spell, but you're also trying to hide from something, verbally having to say the spell loud enough for the target to be affected is going to give away your position. Or like if you're swallowed by a giant worm a giant turkey. We did a Thanksgiving one. There's a giant turkey. If you're swallowed by a giant turkey and you're inside the acidic stomach, that turkey's probably not going to hear you casting a spell on it from within its own stomach. Or they even said in here, for material stuff, you have to have a free hand in order to grab your ritual spell casting item. So if you are bound, you're not gagged, you're bound, you wouldn't be able to necessarily grab an item to use for that spell. So having a healthy mix of stuff that's verbal, somatic, or material is going to be important for getting you out of all sorts of situations.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of give a caveat on the material component. A lot of DMs, because it is very difficult to track the components, what a lot of DMs do is hey, Solo, bud, you want to come sit in my chair? You want to be the DM? He wants to be the DM.
Yeah, he likes to sit in Tyler's chair.
What we usually do is if the component has a gold value.
Okay.
That is when we really care that you have that component.
What's an example of typical? I don't think I've ever done a component spell.
So the most common one would be Revivify. So your comrade goes down, fails all 3 death saves, and dies.
Oh, like legit dies.
Yeah.
Ooh.
In order for you to revive him, you have to have a diamond worth, it's either 300 or 500 gold pieces.
You better hope your party likes you, huh?
So, and it's not something where if it's just like, I have 500 gold. No, you need the diamond worth 500 gold.
And how long after someone's died could you do the revivify?
So there's different levels of revivification. Revivify is the lowest one. And I believe I think it's a minute or an hour. It's one of those two.
Wow. So you better have that diamond handy.
Yeah. And there are, as you go up in levels, there is more powerful spells that allow you to revive people who have been dead for weeks, months, and even years.
Oh.
Depending on how they died.
Okay.
So there's caveats to everything.
Of course there is.
But
the other thing too that I really liked in the book, I just want to call it out. There is a specific section in here that says, being incapacitated or killed. You lose concentration of a spell if you are incapacitated or if you die. And that made me snicker like, no shit, if you're dead, your spell wears off. But that brought up a good point of what concentration is and what it means when you're playing. So concentration is pretty self-explanatory in the real world sense. If you're concentrating on something and your concentration is broken, then that means whatever you're trying to do is probably a little bit harder for you to do. So in D&D, what that means when you're casting a spell is that, let's say it requires you to concentrate for 10 minutes. If anything interrupts you, if you have to cast another concentration spell, if someone attacks you, something like that, obviously that's going to break your concentration. I believe that means that you end up usually having to make a DC save or saving throw?
yes, Constitution saving throw.
Constitution saving throw. In order to see if you keep doing your spell. But that is kind of important because, you know, when you're talking about combat where it's 6-second turns and a round is a minute, things like that, then you do want to make sure that you know if your spells are concentration instantaneous, how long is that concentration. Again, it's just kind of paying attention to some of those details. A spell may sound cool, but if you have all spells that require lots of concentration, that are all verbal or something like that, you're really not taking advantage of how many spells there actually are out there that can give you a better combat mix.
Yep.
Or just non-combat, just life
And
mix.
What you can remember is that I think you said you can only concentrate on one spell at a time. However, you can only concentrate on one concentration spell at a time.
So if you are casting a concentration spell, could you do an instantaneous cantrip?
Yes.
Oh.
So if you're casting Hold Person, which is a concentration spell, you can simultaneously cast Firebolt at a different target.
He likes fireballs and bolts.
As much as you want because it's not another one that requires concentration.
That's a really important thing to know, I think. And even then in the combat turn, one thing that I didn't understand. So first of all, if you're a brand new player, spellcasting is way more complicated than it sounds. And if you're like a Harry Potter wizard given a wand and a book of stuff to do, like you need to know your spells, you need to know how they work, you need to know how to do them in combat, the limitations of those spells. Like for example, if you a turn, right, if you're looking at it, you've got your action, your bonus action, and potentially your reaction if something were to happen. But if you use a spell in your action, you can't use another one as a bonus action or vice versa. You can only cast one spell. If a spell has lingering effects, like I played a cleric, so if you do spiritual word, which is my favorite thing to do as a cleric, because you get to create this cool item with one turn, and then you can move it around and use it to hit people and stuff. Like I had a giant hand that would bitch slap people. It's pretty fun. Then by knowing when and when I couldn't attack, when I cast that spell, I couldn't cast another one. So it took me a minute to kind of wrap my brain around. But it makes it a little more complicated for doing your turns. Especially because it's a lot to remember. It's a lot to do.
It is a lot. And that's why
it's hard. As for newbies, don't
just
do it.
Yeah.
Just
I love
Get
playing
help.
spellcasters. Get help.
Get professional.
I love playing spellcasters because they are one of the most versatile class. And depending on which one you choose, warlock, wizard, bard, you play a very, very different role. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, a warlock has 2 spell slots.
Okay.
No matter what level you are, you only have 2 spell slots that you can do per short rest.
But is a warlock, what's the benefit of a warlock versus a wizard?
So the benefit of a warlock versus a wizard is those 2 spell slots are always cast at maximum level.
He's doesn't want attention. He's just crying because he likes to chit chat.
So, for instance, a level 7 warlock who just got his 4th level spells will automatically cast a 1st level spell as a 4th level with doing more damage, doing more healing, doing more of whatever effect that is.
So it's like the few spells you get pack a heck of a punch.
Yeah, exactly. And you get them back every short rest.
That's a big one. So knowing the short versus long rest reset.
Yep.
That's a big deal because, especially right now in the campaign that we're doing, in a longer running campaign, the long rests are an active component. There's watches involved. There's a chance you're going to get attacked if you're out in the open, etc. But in the one-shot campaign we're doing, we don't get long rests because each session kind of wraps in its own chunk. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a big deal when you're planning. I really didn't think about it until we started doing something like this. But when you're kind of counting on those long rests to help you reset and get some of your cool shit back, all of a sudden you don't have them. So you need to know kind of what's short versus long.
Yep. And that's a responsibility of the DM as well, to allow the party to be able to reset a little bit. Mm-hmm. In every session, especially if you're doing a one shot, he or she should be able to give you the opportunity to take a long rest, to take a short rest, or on the opposite end of that, to make it a more difficult challenge, they will not allow you to do that because whatever you're doing is probably time sensitive.
Yeah, we did one that was like a maze thing where someone was kidnapped and we had to kind of get to them before they were, offed by the bad guy kind of deal. But I would like to point out the DM over here is talking about how it's a DM responsibility to make sure we get long rests. And I have not gotten a single long rest in our campaign.
You haven't needed one.
Throwing that out there if the DM is listening.
You have gotten plenty of short rests, though.
Yeah. That's true. But that is one of those things that when you're playing different classes, take a minute, look at what resets at long versus short rest. I didn't know that for warlocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's some abilities with wizards that allow them to get some spell slots, back on short rests.
Well, and so would you say that the warlock is more of an aggressive version of a warlock, or it combines some of the sturdiness and battleness of a combat player with some of the cool stuff that wizards get? I mean, that's what I'm trying to why would someone play which one?
You got to kind of think about it, where these beings get their powers from.
Okay.
A warlock is usually endowed with powers by some kind of mystical being.
Okay.
They have different pacts. So there's the pact of the blade, which in this, whatever being has given you powers, allows you to concentrate them into your sword or your whatever weapon you choose.
Sure.
There's Pact of the Tome, where you get, it's the same thing, but it's a spell book. So if you think about it, warlocks are the heavy and fast hitters.
Okay.
Depending on which pact they choose.
Are they squishy?
Depending on which pact they choose. So, for instance, Pact of the Chain, I believe, gives you more longevity.
Okay.
And it makes you harder to kill. Whereas Pact of the Blade allows you to have a little bit more sturdiness, but it also allows you to get in the face of whatever you're fighting because your magic is going through your sword. So you need to be up close.
Okay.
You still have the ability, and what every warlock will tell you is their bread and butter.
Blah, blah.
Their bread and butter is their Eldritch Blast. So that's a D10, and if you choose your Eldritch Invocation Agonizing Blast, you add your Charisma modifier, which is the warlock's main thing. So it's generally +4 or +5.
AK, every time it gets their turn, they're just like, well, and I Eldritch Blast.
Yeah,
and you're
exactly.
like, of course you do.
Like, if you only have 2 spells and you run out, you can still use your cantrips. So that's...
Speaking of cantrips, one thing that I came across in here is it was talking about combining magical effects. So the example that the book gave was if 2 clerics cast Bless, that's a fun one. The player doesn't get it twice. I didn't totally understand what it meant by that.
Yeah. So, for instance, say one cleric casts Bless on you, and you get your D4 to add to your roll. In the same turn, another cleric casts Bless on you. You don't get another D4.
Okay.
You just get that first one.
So it's a waste for them to obviously cast it twice.
Right.
But in this case of like healing spells, that's not the case. 2 or 3 people could even cast healing spells on an individual, and it would benefit them.
It's more so for a lasting effect.
Okay, so that's when it's like an instantaneous healing. Right away, you're healed. Whereas Bless, you have it for, I believe, a minute.
I think so.
Something like that.
Same thing with like fire effects. If 2 people hit the same thing with a burning effect, it wouldn't receive 2 times the amount of burning damage, because if you're on fire, you're on fire. You're not on fire twice as much.
Right. Okay. / if you are one of those clerics or lucky individuals, whatever, that has Bless or Guidance. Is that what it's called? Guidance? Yeah. One, use it as much as you can, especially for the cantrips. Use it as much as you can. Also, having that in one of our current campaigns makes me really happy, because I keep telling people, like, let me touch you. Give me a reason to touch you.
Now, that being said, there are a lot of times where someone will make a roll, and then after they roll, the cleric will be, oh, I cast Guidance. Oh, I cast Bless. No. You got to do it before the roll's made. I'm not going to give you that
That's
D4.
fair. I do also like when I do that, I go cast Guidance and then I'll roll. So it's very, very clear that I'm doing that. But really, though, if you have those cantrips, that's the other thing about knowing your spells, knowing what they do, knowing how they work. Because imagine how much more effective a player that has Bless or Guidance can be for their party if they are remembering to continuously cast. I mean, who doesn't want an extra, D4 to add to their roll? Even if you just get a 1 out of that 4, you got an extra. That's all. Sometimes that's all it takes.
That's right.
And speaking of knowing how you're playing it, I forgot about this, but for the component part of it, one of my favorite things about the component, when it says vocal, we have some really fabulous players who come up with some pretty great vocalizations for their spells. One of my favorite ones, she plays a bard who, when she does her, I want to say it's a fire spell, flambe.
Oh, she's activating. She has a flame tongue whip.
Yes.
She's activating it.
Yes. And again, those little things, not only is it just extra fun and super memorable, but it also adds a lot to the session. It makes you feel like you're back in the character and back in those things. And she does that because she knows that it has a verbal component to it, and it's really fun for all of us too. So little things, again, know your spells, know what they do, know what they need.
And that is, well, you're right with the verbal component. However, in the case of that weapon, yes, it's a verbal component, but it's technically activated by a verbal command, which is different than a verbal component of a spell.
So explain to me the difference between a verbal component and a command.
Well, I guess it really depends on what you're talking to. You're talking to the
Always
weapon, or you're talking to
depends.
you're talking to the weapon, or you're talking to the weave.
So the command is talking to the weapon.
Yeah.
And the component is you manipulating the weave.
Correct.
Manipulate your
Now,
weave.
the effect either way is the same thing.
Okay.
But that's it. You know, where you pull the power from is different.
Okay.
Because the weapon was enchanted, so it already has magic within it. You're activating the magic inside that weapon.
So does anything have to with the weave? So there's this idea for spells, and I think it depends on your class, whether it's prepared or known. And so there are some spells I know because I've played as a cleric, because that's the only true spellcaster that I've played. I know that, certain spells for me are known, like cure wounds and stuff like that, because I'm a domain of life specifically. I believe that's part of it. Or do all clerics know some of those healing spells automatically?
There is a list of known spells that I believe all clerics just have the option to choose as one of their known spells.
So what does it mean when you're talking about, I know a little bit, but explain to us, DM, in terms that even beginners can understand. Hi, that's me. What's the difference between known and prepared, and how does that affect how you play and what you need to do?
That's actually a really big question.
Oh, yay.
So every spellcasting class comes with a spell list, and that spell list says at first level you can learn these spells. At second level you can learn these spells. Now the spell list may be, let's just throw a number out there. There may be 20 spells that you can know at level 1, but you only have 3 known spells. So you have to choose 3 out of those 20 and choose those as your known spells.
Okay. Does that mean you always have them, even though other ones you have to prepare?
Correct.
Okay.
So you always know those. The only time you can change that is when you level up. You can swap out one for a different one.
Can you swap out, kind of poker rules here, can you only swap out one, or could you swap out theoretically your entire list of known for an entire list of only one?
One.
Okay.
As the rules are written.
That's raw.
As the rules are written, when you level up, you are allowed to swap out one known spell for another one.
Just one.
On the other hand, prepared spells. Now, this can also be a list of 20 spells that you are allowed to prepare.
Okay.
Prepare happens during, I believe, a long rest. And during that long rest, you can choose any of those 20 spells to prepare for the next day.
If, let's say, you're on a longer term campaign and you're kind of set on your list, like while we're traversing through the forest of T-Rexes, do you need to go in and like restate that you're preparing them every night, or can it be assumed when you're playing a game that every long rest, unless you need to go in and change your spells, that you're like, all right, that's prepared?
I tend to not ask my players what they've prepared because it's really unnecessary for me to know. Also, it creates a nice surprise if they prepare something that I wasn't expecting.
It's always fun to surprise the DM. It gives me great satisfaction. It happens so rarely.
But what I will do sometimes is I might just kind of fact check or double check, because if I know someone only has the ability to prepare 3 spells and they cast those 3 spells one day and the next day they cast a different prepared spell, I'll ask them, did you prepare that spell? And they'll go, oh crap, no, I didn't. The prepared spells is basically with the knowledge that your character has going into the next situation, you can at will change any of your prepared spells during that long rest.
Okay. That sounds good. I mean, that's good enough. And, just like there are with weapons, there's short range, there's touch. Let me touch you so I can give you my guidance. But there is long versus short range. And I happen to know that a certain DM gets a little fussy when we start talking range of spells. In our campaigns, we have 3D figures and maps printed to scale. And at first, I was like, oh, he did this because it's extra cool with the environment and it makes you feel really in the game. You can visualize everything. And I'm starting to suspect that that's not the main reason that he did it.
No, it's still the main reason.
Tell me what fails your saves.
Please don't argue with the DM on area of effect spells. So especially if you can be more lenient if you're doing a theater of the mind.
Okay.
Because you don't physically have a map in front of you. Now, a DM is going to have something in his head
Hopefully.
about how that works. But with the games that we play, we have a map to scale. The figures fit in. We play with squares. We don't do hexes here. That's just a whole.
We don't do that in this house.
Yeah, not in this house. We play with squares, and I have a tool that allows me.
Do you have that tool on hand, DM?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Wait.
No.
Wait.
No. Oh. If he didn't prepare it, can he use it? Hey.
So this.
Can they really see that? It's clear, dear.
Yeah, no.
Here, would you like a backer? Here, back it.
There.
Does that help?
So, for those of you that are listening and not watching, I have a clear plastic thing that shows me to scale with my maps the radiuses of different spells. So it shows me, for instance, a 5-foot cube, a 10-foot cube, 5-foot radius, 10-foot radius, 15-foot cone, which a lot of like poison spray work. Are you mocking me?
I would never, ever do that.
God, you're such a nerd. And then also what it does, which I think is really handy, is all around the circumference, there are numbers on a D12 because there are some spells done by NPCs where you roll a D12 and that determines the direction that spell goes.
Oh, I didn't even realize that about that. That is very, very cool. Fling. No, just kidding.
Now, the way I play and the way that I've interpreted the rules is that within the 5-foot cube or the 5-foot radius, any square that has overlap is affected.
Okay.
So even if you think about it in real life, if that cube just barely bisected you, you're still affected by the spell.
Okay.
So I use this a lot because it helps determine not only for my part, but also for the player's part.
Sure.
Because they do have area of effect spells as well. And I have to determine whether or not my guys are taking damage.
Every time someone's like, hey, I'm going to cast this spell, that like a cone of something, you know, or I need a 15-foot cube. He's like, wham! Lays it down on the table, ready to go.
So it is a very handy tool, and I will always use it.
Yeah. I don't play as many spellcasters these days. I like to rogue it up.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah, I do. I will say, like, I have had a lot of fun messing around with my cleric. I know that for my next campaign, I definitely want to do something in the wizard-like range, or maybe even a druid. I have a backup druid ready for the campaign where my jerk horror cleric is certainly going to die at some point because, you know, he's a horror cleric.
Now that we've talked about known and prepared spell, let's talk about ritual casting.
Oh.
Did you find that?
I did read a little bit about it.
Okay.
I will say I personally find ritual spellcasting a little. I think spellcasting as a whole is kind of complicated. It's one of the reasons that I've always been intimidated by it and kind of steered somewhat clear of it, except when I stumbled into the cleric and in my head I was like, oh, I'm a healing cleric. What do I need to do? Heal shit. Fine. Got it. But like, it's so much more complicated than I thought. Mm-hmm. For ritual spellcasting, you know, I didn't really get a clear picture of what it is. The only information that I walked away with from this is if you cast a ritual spell that takes multiple turns, and at some point your concentration, because they're concentration, your concentration gets interrupted and you fail, you don't expend that spell slot. Mm-hmm. That's my negative.
You've basically just wasted your turns.
But you don't lose the slot.
Which is nice, yes. And it makes sense because you're not actually expending the magic.
It's like one of those things where you try really, really hard and you totally whiff, and the coach is like, good try.
Yeah.
That's what it
feels
like.
Ritual magic finds its place mostly out of combat.
Okay.
For the sake that the majority of ritual casts take anywhere between 10 minutes and several hours.
Okay.
Now, everyone who's played D&D knows a round lasts 6 seconds. So unless you're going to be playing dozens of rounds, you're probably not going to finish your ritual cast. Some ritual casts that are prominent to me are like Find Familiar, if you want to, bring as a wizard, if you want your magical owl or your magical cat, that summons it. I think that usually takes an hour. There's also something like teleportation. The ritual is the act of creating the teleportation circle.
Okay.
So it takes 10 minutes or an hour. I think it's 10 minutes for that one to create that circle. But yes, you pretty much nailed right on the head what I was going to say next, which was at any point during that ritual, if it is interrupted, the magic is not expended because you weren't using magic during the ritual itself.
Okay.
Now, on the other side of that, ritual spells, and I believe this is wizard only. They can, if they find, or if they are able to transcribe a spell into their spell book, they are able to cast that as a ritual spell if they do not have the components.
Okay, so when you're talking about components, in this case, you're talking about the physical materials that are needed to do it, because obviously verbal,
Yeah. I'm talking about
like
components, because verbal, somatic, and then component.
Okay.
Component is material.
Oh, I thought they were all components.
Sorry, material.
I just corrected the DM. See, that's what happens when you do your homework. You get to correct the DM. Totally worth it.
And I turned off her mic. Don't tell her.
Whoa. I'll be loud enough to be heard through your mic. That's good. Well, I did have another random question about, and we'll come back to materials, but it sounds like, and I've never played a character, at least so far, because my cleric is level 5, 6, somewhere in there. I have yet to play a super high level campaign. Mm-hmm. It sounds like rituals are less common. It's not something like, it's not like you need to get a familiar multiple times. You get your familiar one time, and then you have your familiar.
Unless it gets punted or something, then you got to
Whoa.
They only have
punt a cat ritual, a cat
It's
familiar?
happened.
Why you do this? Why
are
you the way that you are?
Generally, the familiars have like a hit point.
So they can die?
Yeah,
I thought you just resummon them.
Yeah, when you resummon them, you roll a die to determine their hit points.
And so every time so I'm guessing it's not like a multi-hour ritual to resummon your existing familiar.
I think it's an hour.
Okay, that's not too bad. So I guess my question is kind of what levels can you start expecting to be, like if you're going into a new campaign, what levels can you start expecting to be able to do rituals? Is it a higher level thing, or is it just we haven't really done a lot of it in our
not
current
necessarily.
campaigns?
You can start off doing ritual spells at level 1. I mean, there's a feat that allows you as any kind of caster, because I think as the classes are written originally, I believe only wizards can innately do rituals.
Okay.
But if you have the feat called Ritual Caster, if you are a bard, a cleric, druid, sorcerer, whatever, you can also do ritual spells.
Okay.
And you choose which spells you want to do as rituals.
Okay.
And you're given a list for those spells and everything that are...
And again, that's more homework. See, those spellcasters, it's like wizards in real life. Gotta know your scrolls.
Yep. So.
It's a lot more work than being like, I want to rogue. I'm gonna sneak in, strike high, and then swoop back and hide. Like that's, it is, and it's important to know that I'm not trying to be down on the spell casting group. It's a super fun. It's a vital role in general. It's great variety. There's a lot that you can do with it. But do know that if you pick that spellcaster, there's kind of 3 main things. And I'm spitballing, so there could be more than 3. But 3 things that immediately come to mind for me. Do your homework so that you know what spells you want to have. Know your, part 2, know those spells well enough that you're not constantly having to check and see what the hit, the DC for you to land, as well as what the actual dice are required in it. Like, know what your cure wounds is if you're a cleric that's going to be curing a lot.
Yeah. Know your spell save DC.
Spell save. Thank you.
That's an important one, because that's something that the DM will ask a lot. Some DMs will write down what each of their spell saves or each of their players' spell saves is. I don't. But I think if you use a tool like we do, generally it's right there.
The tool that should not be named.
Unless they sponsor us, which will never happen.
No.
It's generally right there smack dab in the middle of the page. If you're using paper and pen, please just make sure it's big, bold, because if you're a caster, you're probably going to be saying, I need the DM to make a deck save. I need the DM to make a con save. My usual response is, what's your spell save DC?
Right.
Which is...
The dog is rustling around under the table. But my third thing, I promise I had 3. This one's important. I know this one's important. Uh-oh. But there was a very important third thing. This is pretty common for me not to remember.
Was it about ritual casting, or is it just
no,
about magic
it's about,
casting in
about
general?
if you're going to be a spellcaster.
Yeah. So know your spells.
Know your spells. Know what's required of your spells.
Yep.
I know. It's my biggest pet peeve and something I'm really, really guilty about. When it comes to combat, right? Think in context of the game. You've got 6 seconds, the round, right? The whole round is 6 seconds. Everyone's supposed to be moving. So before it actually gets to you, decide what spell, or even to, have a backup or something you're going to go ahead and do. Because unlike I'm going to go up and slash it with my sword, there's a little bit more involved in it. So it's kind of important going into your turn that you know exactly what you want to do. So I would say in general, if you're going to be a spellcaster, have a fallback that you go to if someone else in front of you makes things kind of go awry, or eliminates the nearby target you were going to have your Eldritch Blast or your Fireball or whatever it is ready to go in your head. And also in general, plan your turn up front. I mean, that kind of goes across the board, but as a rogue, there's only so much. I'm either run up and slash it, hide and throw something at it. I mean, there's not a lot I can really do. With a spell casting, there's a lot you can do in your turn.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right?
I mean, you can, the most, I think, famous offensive cantrip is Firebolt, because it's 120-foot range and it does a D10. It's, it's very commonplace for a wizard to just go, I guess I'll just Firebolt it.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly okay. And I'd rather you do that than spend 30 seconds digging through your spell list.
Or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry, dog. Here's a pup. Easy, puppers.
Please don't pull the cables.
Please don't pull the cables.
We need to get you
He needs more
something.
treats or bones or something. He had a bone last time, so he was, quiet. Okay.
Let's see here. So we're at about the 10-minute mark. Well, 10 minutes left.
10 minutes left, yeah.
So
I did have one.
did you have something else?
I
Because
did.
I have something that we can kind of end on.
Okay. Just making sure. Guys, this homework was pretty deep, so I was taking a lot of notes. But I think, I think that's a good place to kind of start with a lot of this stuff.
He's chewing on a pen.
He's chewing on a pen. You can go ahead with your...
I don't know what you were going to say.
Oh. Sorry, guys. Cute. He's super cute, which is kind of his big save there. But in general, it's one of those, I did not realize how many small details there are into, knowing what your spells have, whether it's the area of effect, whether it's the components you need to have. And sometimes you don't really know that stuff until you start playing with people who do know that stuff.
Yep.
Or your DM quickly corrects you. But I would say if you are going to be a spellcaster, it is absolutely, it's super fun, but it's absolutely worth the time to go and double check. Learn your spells. Give yourself a good combo. Pick spells that make sense for your character. You're lucky if you're doing a one shot and hey, we're not going to be going through the woods at all. It's going to be a one shot all in a deep dark cave. Well, of course you're going to curate your spells based on that. But when you're doing a long-term campaign, you wouldn't theoretically just pick spells that you think are totally useful. I think that there's an element of characterization and role-playing to it, that you should pick spells that make sense for your character. I can't even totally think of something off the top of my head, but our Christina plays kind of a more arrogant elf in one of our campaigns, and one of her spells, and honestly I can't remember what it was, but one of her spells was something that kind of was offhand. It's not necessarily a combat thing. It's because she's a snarky I'm better than you elf. And so it's just like little things that you can do, as a druid, make food and create food and water. That's another one that she had that even though we didn't really need it for the context of that campaign per se, or at least that one shot, it makes sense. If you're a wandering adventurer, you probably need to be able to create food and water with ease. You might need to be able to detect poison in your water, stuff like that. So there are some things that make sense for you to do in the context of your character. But that's all.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. In my Ravnica campaign, I play a warlock whose majority of his spells are utility based and they're not combat based. There's been times where I go several sessions without using any of those spells, but those are the spells that my character would want to have,
right?
Because they're his oh shit spells.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of those things that keep an eye out for situations where you wish you had XYZ spell, and maybe next time that you can change your prepared spells, switch it out for that one. You never know. But yeah, it's a really fun area. It's just there's a lot to it. Don't be intimidated by it. Ask lots of questions. Ask for help. You never know. More experienced players at your table have probably done it before and can give you some really, really good advice.
Yep. And dude, you are bugging tonight. It's a good thing you're super cute.
Anyway.
Please don't chew on the microphone. Okay, that's enough. So what I kind of want to end with, and we're going to end a little early tonight because we have a long day tomorrow. And also he's bugging us. Is I kind of want to talk about magic's place in different settings.
Okay.
So, for instance, let's talk about Faerun, which is where it is the world in which the majority of D&D campaigns are probably played.
Okay.
It's where
it's your standard location.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least what most standard locations are based off of.
Okay.
And that dude, and that kind of setting, you're definitely, it's the way magic works is the way you would expect it to.
Yes.
Necromancy bad, evocation, healing spells are generally left to like holy people, clerics that work in the church. Dude, stop chewing my cables. All right, you gotta go.
So Faerun.
Go away.
I got him.
Okay. Please hold him.
Don't got him.
Yes. So Faerun is the most common thing, and it's basically the way you would expect magic to work. Now there is another location. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Stand by.
Sorry, he just fell over and bonked his head, and it was really funny. Oh God! Ah! Attack of the pup. That way. He's a good boy.
Sorry, give me a sec. I'm trying to remember the thing.
Best laid.
All right. Pooh. Well, I don't remember, but there is a setting where magic is basically taboo, and those who use magic are considered outcasts or they are persecuted.
It doesn't mean that your alignment's evil, though. It just
No.
in the context of that world, you ain't welcome.
Exactly. And then on the opposite spectrum, all right. Can you just put them away?
Yes.
Thank you. On the opposite spectrum, you have a place like Eberron, where magic is so commonplace that it is usually used in certain trades. For instance, you may seek transportation on an airship, and this is so commonplace that this airship is magically enchanted, or there are small shops where people will enchant something for gold, or it's just so common. It's intertwined in daily life. There are small mechanisms that are enchanted and they are alive and they just exist and they're there all the time.
Okay.
So that's the opposite end of the spectrum.
Okay. And that's kind of up to your DM to make a world that Not only that, I mean, obviously they'll tell you before you make your character, but that is something that, you know, a DM with some creativity and knowledge can really make something fun for everybody, and do something unique and different that everybody might like. I know that the universe that we're in right now, in this kind of introductory campaign where we're introducing a lot of new people to how D&D works, does follow those standard rules. And it's always easier to learn the rules when you're following a standard, but it's also really exciting, this idea of a villain campaign or in a universe where the rules are slightly different, because it allows you to explore different aspects of the characters that you normally would not have done. Like being able to do an evil alignment, or knowing that spells you make will make you an outcast. How does that affect how you build that character, their backstory, why that spell is there?
Yep. Sorry. Well, like we said at the very beginning, we could go on for hours and hours and hours and hours about
and
spellcasting.
we'll do lots of other, I would say, there is so much to it that we'll be doing lots of other kind of deep dives on very specific points. This is just kind of a spellcasting is fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to do it right.
Yeah, don't let it intimidate you, but at the same time,
know what you're in for.
You have a responsibility as a spellcaster to understand what the spells are. That's what your character would do.
Right.
So...
in the context of your character, they're going to have, your character has experience with these spells and has for a long time. They've been studying magic. They've been using it. They would know how it works, just like a ranger is going to be familiar with their long range, their crossbow or their bow. Like they will spend years practicing archery.
Yep.
So I think that there is, there is a responsibility there. So that's why spellcasting is fun. Asterisk, do your homework, know what you're doing, etc.
And I think that's going to be it for this episode.
Yes, there's a howling puppy in the other room.
Man, he is begging for attention.
It.
We are not going to be here next week. We are on vacation. However, we should be back the following week.
Oh, yeah. We'll be back the following Monday.
And we will release the topic before then.
Although we are totally interested in hearing any topics you guys want to hear about, because we have all sorts of ideas of what we could talk about. And like he said, we could talk all day long about all of them. Mm-hmm. But if there's something specific, even if it's just a random question you have, definitely let us know and we'll tackle it. He'll probably do more of the actual answering than I will. But hey, you never know. You're going to whip out your little measuring circle.
I don't have it with me. I put it down. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. If you tuned in, if you came and if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe, maybe.
Yeah.
You can go to our website.
That's how YouTube works, right?
Yeah, we have a website, themoreyourroll.com. It's pretty cool. I'm going to be periodically updating. I have like an equipment blog where I'll be posting stuff about my like the 3D printer and the table that we play with.
Table.
And then I'll even post some things about like the equipment that we use for the podcast.
Yeah. And he might even post that little circle thing there so you can be the bane to your parties.
I'll even, what?
Accurate and wonderful.
I'll post an Amazon affiliate link.
Oh, God.
Yeah, money. Speaking of money, we are always trying to raise money for our local charity. Well, Extra Life isn't local, but our chapter does support our local Children's Health Center. And we would be extremely grateful if you were to follow our links on our website to those donation pages. And, even if you have $5, that's $5 that they didn't have.
Yeah. And we'll be doing, apart from these podcasts, we'll do several, fun random gaming events throughout the year that will be specifically, fundraising efforts for Extra Life. But definitely encourage you guys, if you have, especially this time of year, but just any time of year is a good time, thinking about the kids. We definitely want to do as much as we can for them.
And if you want to donate, or if you want to support the stream directly, you can consider the Patreon. Although I'm not pushing that. I'd much rather you donate directly to Extra Life. But until 2 weeks from now, enjoy the second week of December.
Yeah, there you go.
Or second week.
May your second week be a natural 20. Just kidding. That's super cheesy.
We will come back on the 23rd.
Woo.
All right.
Guys, have a good night. Have a good couple weeks.
See ya.